We should have like a fun starting bit. You know how podcasts have intros and stuff? Like we should come up with some kind of... That should be it.
Pastor Ponderings with Jonathan and Hunter and Corey in the background.
Wait, are you live? Like, are we going?
We've been going.
That was it.
Okay,
We just did
perfect.
it. That was incredible. That was incredible. We should recycle that if we ever do this again.
Well, welcome to the podcast. If you're used to hearing sermons on this podcast channel, welcome to our first Monday morning conversation. I'm Pastor Hunter, and we've got Pastor Jonathan here and Corey in the background, as you may have heard in that little ditty intro. Jonathan, how are you this morning?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing well. You have coffee, I have water, so we're off to a great start. If folks heard,
It's usually the other way around, right?
yeah. So I'm anxious, but my anxiety is being managed right now because I have water. So we're off to a good start. We wanted to talk today about the New Room Conference that we, as a staff, just went to, and some of the church members in our congregation went to as well at Fraser Church in Montgomery, Alabama. And the reason we want to do this is not to just kind of, pontificate about our own experience as if it's some sort of come and hear what we experienced. But we want to share the goodness of the conference with those who weren't able to make it. And so we're going to go back and forth and share some of our takeaways from the conference and some things that we think might bless you. But first, Jonathan, why don't you tell us a little bit about the New Room Conference?
So New Room is a conference that's been going on since 2014, yeah?
Something like that.
And it's put on by Seedbed, which is the publishing arm of Asbury Theological Seminary. It's a Wesleyan publishing company founded and led by J.D. Walt, who, when I was at Asbury between 2007 2011, he was dean of the chapel when I got there. And so J.D. launched this effort to start publishing Christian writing materials, studies with a Wesleyan distinctive. And New Room was a conference that was birthed out of this vision to kind of get everyone in the Wesleyan Methodist family together. And the tagline is sowing for a great awakening. And so JD personally, and then Seedbed as an organization, and then it just kind of caught, just became convicted through prayer and vision and even testimonies of what he was hearing God do around the world, that we were on the cusp of another great awakening, that there's been several great awakenings in our nation's history. And New Room, as a collective, kind of believes that if we can just make ourselves available and unite in our hunger for God, that he might show up in an unprecedented way. In the words of John Tyson, who was one of the pastors that spoke at this year's New Room, he says, God goes where he's wanted. And so New Room, for 11 years, has been trying to be a place where God is wanted and pull people together who just, so they call it the Unconference Conference, that it's not primarily about professional development or continuing education, great best practices for ministry that you might get at other conferences. There is great teaching, and there's great preaching, and there's labs and breakout sessions on topics that really fuel the fire of ministry leaders and lay people in the local church. One that I went to, for example, just to give a taste of what some of the topics are, was on prayer ministry training. Another one that I went to was on healing from the lies we believe. So these are like deeply spiritual formative topics that they're trying to expose people to. And yet the main focus is just worship and prayer and creating a space for revival. So while they craft all these plans, the real intent is just to get everybody together and see what God does.
Yeah. It's, I think, my fourth New Room that I've been to. One time I volunteered, and then one time I went as a participant, and then we as a staff went last year in the Woodlands, Texas, just outside of Houston.
And that was my first time.
Mm-hmm. And then this year was in Montgomery, and next year is going to be in Montgomery. So if you want, if what we share today inspires you to want to sign up, we will be going again as a staff, and we'll be inviting church members to come with us. And so Corey maybe can drop that link in he's giving me a thumbs up. So drop in the link in the show notes that you can click on, because I don't know that website off the top of my head. And so you can go and sign up there for next year's New Room in September. But let's start off with, Jonathan, what was one takeaway that you had from the New Room conference that you want to share?
My biggest takeaway, and I'm almost embarrassed as I think about this, because, if I were listening and I heard you ask that question, I would think, okay, what's the one big, great, new idea, just inspirational word that you got from going that I could not get, without going? And the reality is the depth of prayer and fasting. That was it for me. And realizing the difference between kind of cultural Christianity, or what it means to be part of church as like an organization or just a cultural expression of community or fellowship or whatever, and what it means to be part of a deeply formed community who is actively walking with Jesus and seeking him in the secret place. And so doing that privately and collectively, that the reason we fast and pray together is because we fast and pray on our own. And we come together and are united in these practices that other people around us are not. These aren't the practices that are shaping their lives, but they're shaping our lives. And one of the most convicting things, that I heard at New Room, I don't remember which speaker or preacher was saying it, but they were saying, they were just challenging us, especially as pastors, to think about the different administrative things we do in the church, the different committee meetings, and we're a global Methodist church, so we have an SBR committee, a finance committee, trustees committee, council, and it's like, how often do you gather your leaders to like pray over the space before the meeting? And I just thought, what a novel idea. Not to make the opening prayer the first point on the agenda once everybody convenes for the meeting, but to actually get in the space of, hey, we're just going to get there, this amount of time early and just like pray over the space and ask God to move through this administrative committee. And it's like this light bulb, like, oh yeah, we're a church, we're not just any other organization. And so, and we do this for those that don't know, and this isn't trying to like share a secret or something. We want the lay people that come on Sundays to realize the space is prayed over, but we pray over all of the worship services before the 8:00 service even begins. For instance, yesterday, before the choir even got there to kind of sound check and rehearse for 8:00, we had already surrounded the altar table in the worship center and just prayed. Just opened ourselves and invited God. And so realizing that's the heart of everything, is our prayer life, our dependence on God, which is what we demonstrate and practice by fasting, so that we can be drought tolerant followers of Jesus, that when things get really hard and when the pressure increases, man, we're already leaning on him. Mm-hmm. We're already ready for him. And it's not about asking him to bless what we're doing. It's about us leaning into him and finding what he's doing and joining him in that.
Yeah, that's good. And one of the things that we've kind of changed up that you led for our staff is, rather than praying, because ever since I've been here over 2 years ago, and long before that, we were praying before the services, but we were doing it behind the stage in the choir room, which was just where we've done it, but almost doing it beforehand and as others are kind of coming into the worship space, mingling around, as a way of inviting everyone to be in prayer. That it's not, we don't want this to be kind of the staff has prayed over it, the pastors have prayed over it, those who are participating in the service have prayed over it, but
just a handful of people in the back room.
Right, exactly. And we don't, like you said, that John Tyson quote, God comes where he's wanted. Like, we want to even be starting the worship service off wanting God. Mm-hmm. And so that invitation for all of us to be in prayer before we start. That's good. So talk a little bit more about just what you would encourage all of us collectively into for prayer and fasting, as we not just pray for a great awakening in this nation or in this generation, but here in Elmore County.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that you and I have both done in recent sermons is we've introduced this concept of a breath prayer. And I've shared, I don't remember if I've shared one or more than one of the actual breath prayers that I've adopted recently, but there's one that I haven't shared because it's more personal, and I'm not even sure people would understand it. I have a long history of how God has used a particular word of Christ in my life and how that calls me to his presence as soon as I start praying it. But that has become part of how I personally fulfill what I think is Paul's idea of praying without ceasing. Is if I'm breathing, I can be praying, literally. And I have this breath prayer that I can do any time that I'm breathing. And it immediately calls me back to presence. And who was it? Frank Laubach is this older figure who had this book called The Game with Minutes, where he practiced thinking about Jesus consciously for 1 second out of every minute.
Wow.
And it was radical, right? He writes a whole book on it that people can look up, but it's this idea that if I can practice that consciously, then maybe I can actually get to the place where I don't go a minute of my life without consciously being aware of the presence of Jesus. And I really think that's the goal. And it's not about a religious, like, okay, that's really hard, and so I've got to try really hard to do that and become that kind of Christian. It's more about, no, like I want to get to the place as a child of God. Like I'm consciously aware of who my parents are all the time. You know, my kids are consciously aware that even if they're at school, if they need something, like they have access to mom and dad. Like they belong to us and we're responsible for them. They can reach out for a lifeline at any time. And so it's not just about reaching out to God when we need him. It's about having that awareness that, man, he's here. And in God's case, like there's never a place we are that he's not. And so I think practically answering your question, I want to invite people to get to a place where we are aware that there are no lines between sacred and secular in our lives.
Yeah.
And we are the kind of people that everywhere we step is sacred ground. Like we're not, in a sense, we are praying for revival, but we're not just praying for revival. We have to realize I am a revival. Like if Jesus has crashed into my life and I've invited the Holy Spirit to fill me to overflowing, that is revival. Like my life is a revival, and I'm just trying to let him revive it more and more each day. And so if I can do that, then it can start with me and then spread out in concentric circles. And that's how we become a people alive with the presence of God. And that, of course, changes our families and homes, and then changes our church, and then changes our community, then changes our world.
That's good. I wish I could remember who I've been kind of learning this from. It may be, I just finished Win Collier's biography on Eugene Peterson called A Burning in My Bones. And it may have been him that was talking about Eugene would kind of had this shift from thinking about a prayer life to having a life of prayer. Mm-hmm. And whoever it is that was saying it was saying that they used to kind of think of their prayer life as like this kind of separate part of their life. But instead, what they shifted to was saying, how can my life be a life of prayer? And I think that's kind of what you're talking about with that, rather than saying, oh, these are kind of the spiritual or the sacred parts of my life. These are kind of the unsacred or the secular parts of my life. No, saying actually all of your life is spiritual. All of your life is sacred. And so why not go ahead and be praying throughout every moment of your day? Mm-hmm. And it was actually, I think probably because we've been talking a lot about breath prayer recently. So I did, they have these pre-conferences that you can sign up for at the New Room Conference, where it's just kind of one person teaching kind of for a couple hours before we get into the actual conference itself. And I went to John Tyson's pre-conference and was just kind of sitting there chatting with the people at my table beforehand. And as John started, felt this like really deep sense to just pray a breath prayer of, Lord, I am here. Lord, I am here. And I've kind of I was taking that through the rest of the conference as I was just, when I kind of as a recentering of, Lord, I'm here, like that. I want you, I need you, so will you show up? Mm-hmm. It's good.
I love that you said that, because one of the speakers, I don't remember who, maybe you do, said oftentimes we are asking for more of God. Like Like, God, I want more of you. Like, can I just have more of you? And we want more of him, and we feel like the amount we're getting of him is limited, but we don't realize that he's looking at us going, actually, I want more of you. And what's holding us back is not that we're not asking for more of him, but we're asking for more of him while holding back part of ourselves. And so just that breath prayer of saying, Lord, here I am, is like, yeah, of course we expect you to be at New Room, Lord. That's why we're there. But I want to use this as an opportunity to give you myself. Like, you have full, man, what if that was our prayer every day? If we just woke up every day and lived to say, Lord, you have all of my life. I think it was Dallas Willard who used to say, it's not just willing what God wills, it's being willing to will what God wills. And I think that's most of our problem, is like, when I really stop and back up, like, am I even willing to let God change my will, my wants, to where I only want what he wants? And I think the answer is yes, because I know that what he wants is always best. And if I want something that's not what he wants, then he probably has something better. I just haven't gotten to that point of believing it yet, right? Yeah. So what else stuck out to you from New Room?
Yeah, kind of like you said, I wish it was this kind of thing that was novel to share with everyone, but I just came with a deep sense of hope coming out of the conference. And I think I've been asking God a lot kind of about that. And some of this is just because I think coming out of New Room, I just kind of asked myself this question. I think I've come to the conclusion this calendar year has been the hardest year of my life. And it hasn't been the worst because hard isn't the same as bad. But it has been the hardest in terms of some things that are happening in my personal life. And so I came to New Room with this deep desire and expectation for God to show up, and like kind of got to this point of just surrendering, of saying, like, whatever it looks like for you to show up, like, I want you to show up. And he just kept, like, I mean, from the very first time, like, moment of that pre-conference, it just felt like he was showing up and just giving me hope. And so kind of in my journaling afterwards, one thing that I said was that it felt like I finally kind of broke the surface from being kind of in a raging river, and realized, like, the shore isn't that far, and there, like, that I can still kind of breathe. And I was thinking, what does this have to do with anybody other than me? Because I even just thought, why would I share this? But felt like I should. And I think it's because this is what the church is. Like, there were other people in the room at New Room that, because I know their stories, because, either I'm friends with them, or they and I share similar friends. Like, I know some of what is going on in their life, and watching them respond to God in worship and in prayer, despite the incredibly difficult things. One has a child who has cancer right now. One is just going through just the worst things imaginable with his employer. And to watch them be able to worship made me say, not as well, why am I so, bothered by the things going on in my life, as if, it was right for me to repress that, but to say, if they also going through really, really, really tough things in their life, if they're able to worship God, then I have hope that I can too. And even to hear speakers, kind of preachers, talk about the struggles that they were facing, and the ways that they've gotten through the things that God has led them through, as a hope of, then I can get through those as well. And I think one thing that was really interesting, so there's Barna Research, which is a research organization. I believe they only kind of study the Christian world. And I think their head researcher, David Kinnaman, joined us at the conference via Zoom. And he was kind of telling us some trends that were happening in the church. And one thing that I thought was interesting that I've heard before Kinnaman said this, is that is the frequency of church attendance. And I think it was like the average Christian worships like 1.4, 1.6 times a month in church in person. And I think one question that the church has had to wrestle with after COVID is what's the importance of being together in person and worshiping? And I think there's this, there's kind of the double-edged sword of we need to have expressions of worship that can be online for those that just can't make it in person. Like what a gift that COVID has given the church to be able to connect better with those who aren't able to be in person. But I think there's also this like, oh, well, I can catch the sermon later. I can, I don't need to be there in person. And so I think the burden's on the church to answer, like, why do people need to come and worship together? What's important about embodied worship? And I think this was helping me to realize it's because when we see other people worshiping, like when we know that somebody is dealing with some financial trouble or health issue and they're still able to worship God, then when I'm in a challenging place and I struggle to worship God, I can rely on their ability to worship God in the struggle as kind of a strengthening of my own faith, that there is this corporateness in that. Because struggle is so isolating. Like the personal struggles we have make us go inward. And so to be in worship and look outward and say, if they can do it, I can do it too. Or if they can do it, I can rely on. Like, I mean, I'm thinking of the story of Moses standing on the mount, having to have two people lift up his hands. Like, that is what the corporate body is for. And so...
And that story of Jesus, when Jesus was in the house and the friends lowered their paralytic friend through the roof, and Jesus looks at him and says, their faith has made you well, which, I mean, that's a whole sermon, right? Like people wondering, how does that work?
Sure.
But borrowing on other people's faith, and that actually being part of the church's story is so beautiful, man.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mention that story because I mentioned a couple weeks ago in the service before my sermon about a vision that God had given me, and that was the vision was kind of a retelling of that story. And so, wow, to realize that God is kind of bringing to completion, but also to be continued, that fulfilling of a vision of we need others we need to carry others, and we also need to be carried by others.
Yes.
John Tyson in his pre-conference was telling about taking his mom and dad on a trip where he just Tyson is from Australia, and so he flew them from Australia to the U.S. kind of a last visiting the U.S. Because of their age, and he just wanted to like overly bless them in this trip. So pay for nice hotels, pay for all the sites and stuff like that. And he said his dad was loving it. Like, man, get to do all this fun stuff for free. And his mom was feeling horrible. And finally he said that from the back seat in the car, his dad at one point just said, "She's bad at receiving." And John was like, yeah, aren't we all? Like, yes, so often we are bad at receiving from God, from others, and that is one of the reasons that we join together as a body is to give to others, but also to receive from others. And I think a lot of us are like John Tyson's mom, that we struggle to receive from others, and yet we need it desperately.
Man, when I hear you talking about struggling and how hard struggling is and how isolating it can be, I'm reminded of what the name Israel means. Before Israel was the name of God's people, it was the name of a person, Jacob. And God changed his name to Israel because he had wrestled with God and man and prevailed. And so Israel means one who wrestles or one who struggles. And that was the name of the covenant people in the old covenant. And so it's easy to say, well, we don't go by that name anymore. We're the church. But what is the church? It's grafted into that people with that name through the one who is known as the suffering servant. I mean, nobody struggled greater than Jesus, right? And so to be a struggler and a sufferer, and yet to find the hope and the redemption that you're talking about in this body of fellow strugglers, fellow sufferers, and to be able to look across the room. I mean, what you're talking about that you experienced at New Room is something that we can all experience every time we gather in a worship service of any kind with any number of people, is to look across the room and say, wow, like I'm struggling and suffering with this, but that person is struggling with this, and that person is struggling with this. And one beautiful thing I love is in our worship services, sometimes I will see people here during like the pastoral prayer time that someone's going through something, and we'll pray for them. But then after the service, somebody will beeline them from across the room and say, hey, you don't know this, but I actually went through that, and I would love to talk to you about how to navigate that, and just let you know, like, I'm here for you and I can pray for you. And I've had people come up with tears in my eyes and say, did you know so-and-so went through the same thing I'm going? And I'm like, wow. So that's such an inspirational and active way that I think God uses the church to bless us.
Yeah.
So we've named a couple of big names, like John Tyson, we've named several times, and we've quoted some authors. But one of the takeaways I remember you mentioning when you and I got back from New Room was this idea of unlikely messengers. And you didn't explain what you meant by that, but I would love to hear it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I certainly received a lot of ministry from, people like John Tyson, Tara Beth Leach, some of the kind of headliners. But there was just this kind of theme throughout for me of God using unlikely messengers. And the first time I noticed this was there was a speaker that I just have had a bad experience with before. And so I wasn't looking forward to their message, but as they started, I thought, okay, God, like I want to put aside my own kind of differences with this person and just hear from you. And I mean, it was one of the best messages that I heard during the conference. And this person actually mentioned Jonah, and I thought, what another unlikely messenger is this guy that God calls, that literally runs the other direction. First of all, calls him to go and preach to one of Israel's enemies, like the cruelest nation that was in existence at the time. Like the horrors we may have seen in the world in the last like 200 years pale in comparison to what I think it was the Assyrians that Nineveh was a part of, and this would have been the capital of that nation, I think. And so, like for who is going to reach them? Probably not like one of their enemies. Like they're probably not going to listen to an enemy. But God calls the unlikely messenger to go, and he runs and like gets spit back out from the fish, and yet God still calls him to go to the people of Nineveh. And Jonah does it, but he's not very happy about it. And if you read the whole book of Jonah, like he's actually not he doesn't even want the people that he's preaching to turn to God. So like not somebody you would want to be one of your pastors. But yet God still uses a really lame sermon from a really lame prophet to a very unlikely people. And then once I realized that, like I just started seeing many ways that God was kind of using unlikely messengers. I mean, some of the like most kind of helpful healing ministry I received at New Room came from people that had paid to go to New Room, like that were just regular participants. Friends of mine that I was able to offered to pray for me and shared some things about their own experiences that was really helpful for me, and conversations that I had in the hallway. And some of that is just like New Room is kind of this reunion for those that went to Asbury for seminary. We'd see a lot of our New Room folks, and so kind of the camaraderie that happens with a bunch of kind of our fellow classmates, but the people that I didn't expect some of them didn't even expect to see, but didn't expect to receive just like deep healing and ministry from were some of the ones that we were able to receive. And I think one thing that Seedbed has really been pouring into ministering to Gen Z, so those kind of born after 1995 to, I don't know, do you know where Gen Z ends? Okay, so probably to those that are around 18 years old right now. So you're 18 to 30-year-olds roughly. And they've just really been kind of leaning into this generation and saying, like, we believe God is at work in your generation, and we want to sow the seeds for the awakening. And we've seen that. I mean, we've seen that at the Asbury outpouring back in 2023. We heard about that happening in Munich, Germany. We heard stories of that in Houston. I mean, just kind of around the world, we see that, and we see it being led with Gen Z. And Gen Z is, I can't remember exactly kind of what the stats were, but Gen Z is coming to church more than I think any other generation, percentage-wise, right now. That the growth in Christianity is being led by Gen Z, and I think for probably many folks, like, Gen Z would not be the likely messenger that, like, God would start to bring people back to church. Like, if we chose, I actually, after the outpouring, I wrote about this, that if we were to choose how to do a revival, we wouldn't choose the generation that is least trusting of institutions to have a revival at 100-plus-year-old institution. Like, that's just not what we would have chosen, and yet God chose that. And then as I just continued to think about it, one thing that really kind of stood out to me is that it's Gen Z men that are coming to church, but they haven't seen a lot of that with Gen Z women. And that
was one of the statistics shared by David Kinnaman with Barna, right?
Right, yeah. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, and probably only a few of the reasons that I think for that are actually accurate. But who knows why that is? But one thing that I thought is, I wonder how much of that is that we are kind of expecting God to speak through people we expect Him to, and roughly half the American church thinks that God only calls men to be pastors and leaders in the church. And the Wesleyan church, the Wesleyan movement, the Methodist movement, is the oldest Protestant denomination movement that has ordained women. And during the conference, I just realized, like, how many women were the ones, like, pastoring and mentoring and leading me in that conference. And to think, like, for so many people that, like, saying, oh, like, the spiritual leading came from women, that's such an unlikely messenger. And to just think God so often uses those that are unlikely to minister to us, to speak His words and His goodness to us. And honestly, I mean, I am here at Mulder. I'm here as the pastor that I am because of unlikely messengers, because of women in ministry, because of my call to ministry came after I was so mad at somebody that I said, I don't even want to be around people. I just want to be alone with God. And it was in that moment that God spoke to me. And so, like, these unlikely things that God uses for His glory. And I think, as we've kind of talked about throughout this podcast, the openness for God to show up in the way that He wants to is kind of that surrender of, God, whatever you have for us, like, we are here for that.
Mm-hmm. So the sermon I preached yesterday is still working on me, which happens frequently. But part of what I hear you saying reminds me so much of the two parables that we preached on yesterday of the seed that grows and the farmer doesn't know how. He goes to sleep, wakes up, and the soil produces all by itself. And then also the mustard seed, that God takes the seemingly insignificant and the small and the under the surface, the quiet, and something so expansive and so eternally outlasting of all the big, loud, attention-getting stuff, the unlikely messengers. And so it wasn't, part of what I hear you saying is the folks that you went to New Room to hear from, like, yeah, they blessed you, but the folks that blessed you the most were the ones that paid tickets, and they were participants just like you. And
exactly.
And that sounds so kingdom to me, right? Mm-hmm. That it's not always on the stage where God's message is preached the loudest. It's behind the scenes and in the corridors and the hallways. It's the meek and the unexpected and the small, and it happens in the secret place. And so one of the things that I shared at the end of the sermon, I think at two of the services, but at one I ran out of time and I landed the plane somewhere else, was this idea that the disciples didn't understand the parables that Jesus was speaking to the crowds, but they went away with him. And it says that when Jesus was alone with his disciples, he explained everything. And the point that I made that kind of stood out to me was, if we stay crowd people, like, and it's possible to do that, especially in our culture, to come to church and be part of the crowd and think that we're part of the core, when really we're just gathering in kind of the large group setting to listen to this man who has interesting sayings and teachings, but then we just go home. And the disciples were those that stayed, and they leaned in, and they sought him in the secret place, not just in the big public gatherings. And so the secret place is where we learn the secrets of the kingdom. And that's where they learn the secrets of the kingdom. And so developing, again, kind of circling back to what we talked about in the beginning, developing a life of prayer and fasting, not having lines between the sacred and the secular, but also having a very thin line between the private and the corporate. That the disciples' attentiveness to Jesus wasn't just in the big public crowd settings, although things happened there. Yes, like coming together for worship, as we talked about, the edifying effect of that and the benefit of gathering with others. And the disciples, even when they weren't in those big crowd settings, they were gathering with Jesus, with one another, kind of that small group, like let's get alone with him. Let's wrestle out what he's saying. And let's, what did you get from that? I thought it meant this, which is what we hope goes on in our Sunday schools and our small groups. But that developing a life of seeking him in the secret place. Like you said, not just having a prayer life, but having a life of prayer, a life of fasting, a life of depending on him and seeking him and pressing in privately and publicly. And you had some thoughts about that too, right? The secret place. And it was something that somebody said that stuck out to you that you were telling me about.
Yeah. Before I touch on that, I think there's like this question of what would it look like for us to just expect God to show up at any time and all times? Like, what does it look like for us to expect that God will show up at the grocery store, in the car line, sitting on the couch? Like, I think if we come with an expectancy, and not even like not a mandate that God does show up and that we'll be disappointed or angry if he doesn't, but just saying, like, as I head into work today, like, I'm looking for God to show up. And then I think he is showing up. I think we're just not always, and myself especially, like, I'm not always aware of the ways that he's showing up.
Yes, preach. Because Jesus came into the world, and he was crucified outside Jerusalem, which is a big, important city with a lot of history, but that's not where the bulk of his ministry happened. Mm-hmm. His ministry happened in the hills of Galilee,
right?
The Judean countryside, places like Nazareth. I mean, one of the guys said, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Right? Capernaum. He came into the world, and so he didn't just come. Like, New Room is not just God's world. This world is God's world. And like you said, at the grocery store, we're in God's world. In the car line, like, these are the places, the neighborhoods that we live in. These are the places where Jesus came to say, the kingdom is here. Like, it's all around you. And so, yes, just waking up to that awareness and choosing to be conscious and saying, Lord, I expect you here because this is where you came and this is where you continue to come, in my Judean countryside, and fill in the blank.
Yeah. Yeah, like we wrote about in our newsletter article, like finding Aslan by another name in our world. Mm-hmm. What does it look like to be looking for Jesus anywhere and everywhere? So the secret place was this kind of, we read in Scripture Jesus goes to the secret place, and I think what the gospel writers are talking about is that he went to a place where others couldn't find him, whether that be a garden or a hillside or wherever, to be with God. And in his pre-conference, John Tyson talked about this, kind of the whole so it was called The Power You Need for the Life You Want, which I was like, I have no idea what this is going to be about. Sounded like a pretty cheesy title to me. And really what it was there are times that we kind of get what he defined as cultural stimulus. So something that happens that we respond to, whether that be, your kid having an outburst, or whether that be, bit of news that you see on TV that really, gets you emotional in some way. Or if that's, you drop one of your favorite china plates in the kitchen, whatever that is, something happens and then we respond to it. And often, I don't know about you, but often the way I respond is not always the way that I would like to respond, that I just have this kind of immediate reaction that then I look back and I'm like, I regret that, like that it either just wasn't helpful or it was sinful, or, that's a part of my personality that I don't like. And Tyson talked about the gap between those two, the stimulus and the response. He talked about that like millisecond gap for like 2 hours. And basically what he said was, we need to train ourselves to respond not with a cultural response, not with the way the culture wants us to respond, whether that be with anger, with outrage, with blame, with curse word, whatever. But instead, how do we have a kingdom response out of that? And he kind of broke it down into several different things. But the takeaway I really had is what he called the goal of the Christian life, which is to create a secret world with God that gives us inner life, love, joy, what Ephesians chapter 3, verse 19 talks about as the fullness of God. And so it's not just like when I think going into the conference, what I thought about as secret place was kind of morning devotional time, but rather he kind of contrasted the secret place with what he calls the third world, which is this concept kind of in research on like when we want to retreat from the world, where do we go to? So for some, that's they go to watching TV. For others, it's TikTok. For others, it's obsessing about their kids' sports. For others, it's pornography. For others, it's name whatever kind of thing. And some of them aren't bad kind of on their own, but we use them in a way that they weren't designed to be kind of an escape from the world that we want to avoid, and from the stress or whatever the emotions of the world that we're trying to avoid. But rather what Tyson talked about was, instead of going to the third world, what does it look like to go to the secret place? And that doesn't mean, to go and pick up a devotional and sit on your comfy chair, but what does it look like to turn to God in those moments and say, rather than numbing myself through TikTok or online shopping, like, what does it look like to actually find joy and relief and love and peace in God? And that's just a really kind of helpful concept for me. And one of the things that he said about the secret place is that the secret place, getting into the secret place, will shape us to become like God by enjoying the pleasure and the presence of God. And getting into the third world will shape us into the image of the world. And so, like, what does it look like for me to create a place? One thing that he said, I'm going to kind of butcher the exact quote, but he basically said, a lot of times we don't go to the secret place because we don't actually enjoy God. And so what does it look like to start just genuinely enjoying God? And I think that's kind of a hard concept for us to think about. But what does it look like for us to just find pleasure and joy in God? And I'm curious, not for you to give away all the secrets of your secret place, but what does it look like for you? How have you found you probably more than most anybody I know, I think, have a robust secret place where you find joy and pleasure in God, in seeing him finding joy and pleasure in you. And so what has kind of that journey looked like for you to get to a place where you find that life, that love, that joy, the fullness of God in the secret place?
Man, well, first of all, I'm flattered, and I would say I'm still working on it. But I think I love what you say about just acknowledging what you're calling the third world, which is a new concept to me, is that kind of escape place, or that thing you do, or that place you go, or that thing you fixate on, or that habit you have. It really kind of is a way of numbing out or escaping. And I think the first thing we have to admit is that if we have a thing or a place, Again, like you said, some of them can be like morally questionable, but some of them just can just be neutral or seem kind of harmless. But if it's for the purpose of escaping or numbing out, kind of a little mini vacation, then sometimes the question is like, it's one thing to do things that help you rest and renew and revive your soul and just restore. Like for me, if I do a lot of thoughtful, prayerful work during the day, then actually doing something mindless with my hands when I get home or on the weekend is helpful. But if I'm doing it as an escape, then I have to ask myself the question, what am I escaping from? Like, what is so bad and stressful about my life? And most people can answer that very quickly. Like, I'm going through this really hard thing, or it's been a really hard day with the kids, and I can't just look at my kids and say, hey, you're making me have a really hard day. Stop it, But to find that which we need in God, not in something else. And so I would say the first step that I have learned that has been life-changing as I try to kind of cultivate what you're saying about that secret place is brutal honesty and like admitting to God, I don't really think I want to be with you, and here's why. Because chances are there's a lie there. Because we were created to want to be in God's presence. And so if I don't want to be in God's presence, it's not something wrong with God. It's something wrong with my view of God, or something that I'm believing about God, or something that I think is going to happen if I get in the presence of God, or something that I think he's going to make me face about myself that I don't want to face about myself. And so just getting brutally honest and letting him talk back and say, like, you can handle it. Like, you can handle my most atrocious emotions. You can handle the lies I'm believing. You can handle, you can handle my thoughts about you, as raw as they might be sometimes. And I invite you to speak back. And what shocks me is what he says in return. Mm-hmm. It's never what I expect. It's never what I would say if I was popping off at me, or whatever. It's always filled with grace. They're hard words sometimes, but it's always a hard word I need to hear. And it's never something, what God says to me when I am brutally honest with him, I can't think of a time it's pushed me farther away from him.
Wow.
Even when it's been a hard word, he always says something that pulls me closer. Because I realized, man, that might have been really hard, but that's what I needed to hear. And I could have only gotten that from you. And now I want to hear more of what you have to say. Or I want to let you work on that thing that you just exposed or spoke to me about. And so just inviting him in and realizing, I can only get these things from him. I mean, that's why I want to cultivate a deeper secret place in my life. That's why I want to cultivate a deeper life with God, is because what I experience when I do that is something I can only experience from him. He has things that nothing else can give me, no other relationship can give me. And he chooses to manifest through relationships sometimes. Like my wife is probably the single most consistent conduit for God's voice and God's action of grace in my life. But that's because of the level of intimacy we have, right? Her proximity, her knowledge of me. Of course, he's going to use that. But like you said earlier, it's also come from unexpected messengers. But then I have to cultivate that ability for it to come directly from him in private as well. Not just from external sources, not just from other people, but Lord, could I get to a place where I could hear from you directly? Could I get to a place where you could speak to and act upon my life directly? And I think his answer is always, oh, I've been waiting to do that. I've just been dying for you to let me do that.
That's good. Well, how's that for a first podcast?
Hey, I like it. I would love, since we didn't have a plan for how to kind of land the plane or wrap this up, I would love just to pray for us and for anybody listening. Lord, we're just so grateful for the ways that you moved on the lives of those who attended New Room, but also for the reminder that it is that you desire for every gathering to be a place where we can encounter your presence. Lord, even when we're alone, that we can develop a life with you that is filled with life and renewal and revival and grace and just the fullness of your presence, that you always want to give us more of yourself, not less. And you invite us to give you more of ourselves, not less. And so I just pray over whoever is listening right now, that you would meet them in the moment they're in the present moment, in whatever needs they have, that you would meet them there, that you would answer prayers, that you would show up in hoped for ways, but also ways unexpected, and that you would flood us with your grace as we seek you in the secret place, both alone and together. Lord, we pray that Mulder would be a place where fellow strugglers and sufferers could gather together and be inspired and encouraged by looking across the room and saying, man, I'm part of a family. I'm part of a faith family, and I'm grafted into a story that is so much bigger and so much longer than just the events of my life. And Lord, I pray that you would just pour out blessings upon blessings, because we do believe that you are up to something. We believe that the Asbury outpouring a few years ago was part of that. The stories that we're hearing of what you're doing across the globe, but even as close as Auburn, Alabama, and the revival that's happening among college students all over our nation, the revival that's happening in places like Germany and other places whose stories we would not know if not for the church. And if not for those intent on gathering together to cultivate those stories and share testimonies, Lord, more. We just pray for more. And I pray for your outpouring upon the one listening right now. In Jesus' name, amen.